The laughter from the crowd was deafening, the kind that cuts through bone. A group of cocky young men had cornered Maria at her modest produce stand, their taunts dripping with venom. They mocked her age, her worn clothes, and even mimicked her accent for everyone to hear each cruel jab designed to strip away her dignity in front of her customers. Maria, 42 years old, had spent 2 decades working these same streets in downtown San Diego, selling fresh fruit from a squeaky old cart with peeling paint. Every morning, she hauled boxes from her beat-up van, set up under the same patch of shade, and greeted regulars with a warm smile. She wasn't rich, but she was proud. Proud that she earned every cent through honest work. That pride made their words burn even deeper. The conflict hadn't started overnight. For weeks, these same young men had lingered around her corner, tossing out small insults, calling her fruit lady in mocking tones, pretending to haggle, only to walk away laughing. She'd ignored them, thinking they were just bored troublemakers. But that day, their cruelty crossed the line. One of them picked up an apple from her stand, took a loud bite, and spat the half-chewed pulp onto the ground right at her feet. "Careful!" One of them sneered loudly enough for passers-by to turn their heads. Those iron hands might crush this rotten apple before she even sells it. The crowd chuckled. Another chimed in iron hands, more like rusty old tongs. They high-fived each other, feeding off the attention. Maria's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the pressure of holding back the fury bubbling in her chest. She could feel her hands tightening into fists beneath the table. The old here before life taught her to stay quiet would have grabbed them by the collar and thrown them into the street. But years of keeping her head down had dulled that edge, or so she thought. As the jeers continued, her eyes caught sight of something in her cart, a thick leather strap she used to secure crates. It wasn't a weapon, but the memory it triggered was sharp. Years ago, before she became a vendor, Maria had worked loading cargo for a shipping company. There, she'd learned how to lift a 200-pound box, how to control a fall with one arm, and most importantly, how to grip steel cables without slipping. Her hands weren't just strong, they were dangerous if she chose to use them. That memory flickered like a spark in dry grass. The bullies didn't notice her straightening her back, didn't notice her taking one slow breath to steady herself. But inside, Maria was no longer the woman swallowing her pride. She was calculating, watching, waiting, and they had no idea that their next move would wake a side of her no one in this market had ever seen. The following morning, the sky over downtown San Diego was washed in pale orange light as Maria wheeled her cart into place. The laughter from yesterday still rang in her ears, not because it hurt, though it did, but because it had etched itself into her memory like a challenge. She wasn't a woman who went looking for fights, but she wasn't the type to let someone make her feel small twice. She arranged her fruit the way she always did. Perfect pyramids of apples, bunches of bananas, with stems neatly tied. Mangoes gleaming under the morning sun. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the insults, the smirks, the way the crowd had looked at her like she was an easy punchline. By late morning, the market was in full swing. The smell of grilled carne asada drifted from the food trucks, and the air was thick with chatter and the clinking of coins. Maria felt it before she saw them, a shift in the atmosphere, an undercurrent of tension. Sure enough, the same group swaggered toward her stand, cups of iced coffee in hand, their sunglasses reflecting the morning glare. "Well, well," the tallest one drawled loud enough for customers nearby to turn their heads. "If it isn't the Iron Hands herself." He said it like a punchline, the others laughing on cue. Maria didn't answer. She just met his gaze, her expression unreadable, and reached to straighten a basket of pears. "Aw, come on, don't ignore us," another sneered, leaning in close enough that she could smell the stale beer on his breath from last night. "We just came to see if your grip's as strong as they say." He grabbed a mango from her cart and began tossing it from hand to hand like a toy. Her jaw tightened. "Put it back," she said evenly, her voice low but sharp. "Ooh, scary," one of them mocked, and just like that the harassment escalated. One shoved her empty crate off the side of the cart, sending it clattering to the ground. Another poked at the stack of bananas until they tumbled down in a bright yellow cascade. Maria's pulse quickened not with fear, but with anticipation. This was it. The line they shouldn't have crossed. Then the moment came. The tallest one reached out his hand, brushing her arm, as he tried to shove her backward. It wasn't a hard push, but it was enough. Maria's reflexes took over. Her right hand shot out like a striking viper, seizing his wrist in mid-motion. The suddenness of it made him stumble. She clamped down with a grip honed from years of hauling, tying, and locking heavy cargo in place. Her fingers dug into the tendons of his wrist with unyielding precision, and she twisted not enough to break, but enough to send a lightning bolt of pain up his arm. His smirk vanished instantly, replaced by wide-eyed shock. "What the?" His voice cracked as his knees buckled, forced downward by the sheer pressure of her hold. The market seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped. Coins paused mid-air over outstretched hands. Even the smell of sizzling meat seemed to hang still. Maria leaned in her voice, a low growl only he could hear. "You should have left with your dignity yesterday." His face flushed red as his friends exchanged stunned looks, suddenly unsure whether to laugh or intervene. The tension was thick humming in the charged air, and Maria knew this was only the beginning. The bullies' friends finally shook off their shock, their swagger replaced with a flicker of unease. One of them stepped forward, his tone sharp, but not nearly as confident as before. "Hey, let him go. We were just messing around." Marie didn't even glance at him. Her focus was locked on the man in her grip, whose breathing had gone shallow. His knees were now fully on the asphalt, the sound of fabric scraping against the rough pavement carrying through the stunned silence of the market. "You don't get to decide when this ends," she said, her voice as steady as her grip. The second man tried again, this time reaching out to pull her off. Big mistake. With her free hand, Maria snatched his wrist mid-swipe and rotated her body just enough to use his own momentum against him. He stumbled forward, and with a subtle pivot of her hip, she had him bent awkwardly at the waist, his face inches from the ground. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. Phones were out now, camera lenses capturing every second. Someone whispered, "Holy hell, she's got both of them." The first man groaned the tendons in his wrist, straining under her grip, while the second cursed under his breath, trying to wriggle free without snapping his arm. But Maria's hands were like clamps, unyielding, immovable, as if forged from iron. She'd once been underestimated in a warehouse job too. Back then, she had to prove to a crew of dock workers that she could handle the same cargo they could. She learned to use leverage angles and timing, not brute force alone. Now, those same skills were flowing back like muscle memory, sharp and deliberate. A third bully, clearly the smallest of the group, tried to circle around to her left side. She caught him in her peripheral vision. Without releasing her hold on the other two, she shifted her foot and gave a swift, precise kick to the inside of his knee. He yelped, collapsing onto the ground, clutching his leg. The audience's murmurs grew louder. A man in a baseball cap chuckled under his breath. "Damn, she's taking them apart like it's nothing." The tallest bully's face twisted in pain. All right, I'm sorry." His voice cracked. But Maria didn't ease up immediately. She could feel the tremor in his arm, the way he'd stopped resisting and just wanted it over. Only then did she release him abruptly enough that he almost fell backward. He cradled his wrist like a fragile glass, glaring up at her, but not daring to step closer. The second man she'd restrained scrambled to his feet, massaging his shoulder, his earlier bravado gone. Maria straightened her chest, rising and falling slowly, eyes sweeping over all three of them. "Anyone else?" she asked, her tone flat, but laced with steel. "Boy." No one moved. The market had shifted entirely now. The energy, the mood, the unspoken rules. The bullies who moments ago strutted through the crowd now looked small-cornered. But Maria wasn't done yet. The humiliation she had endured yesterday still echoed in her bones, and part of her knew that this was the moment to make sure it never happened again. The three bullies stood frozen, their earlier smirks erased, replaced with a mix of pain and disbelief. Maria could feel the weight of every gaze in the market pressing down on the scene. It was no longer just her fight, it had become a public reckoning. One of the younger vendors from across the street, a kid barely out of high school, stepped forward with his phone still recording. "You guys still think she's just some fruit lady," he called out, his voice dripping with satisfaction. The crowd chuckled, emboldened, now that the power had shifted. The ringleader, the tall one whose wrists still throbbed, looked from the audience to Maria, his ego fighting against the urge to back down. He lunged forward, not with any real plan, just pure instinct to reclaim some shred of control. Maria sidestepped with practiced precision, catching his forearm in midair and turning her body sharply. The move was simple but devastating her hip, acting as a pivot point, sending his body tumbling over her leg. He hit the pavement hard, the breath knocked clean out of him. The crowd's collective gasp was followed by a few scattered cheers. The second bully cursed and rushed her from the side, but Maria met him halfway. Her hand shot out like lightning, seizing the collar of his t-shirt. With one sharp jerk, she used his forward momentum to slam him against the side of her cart. Apples spilled to the ground, rolling across the street, but Maria didn't flinch. The metallic clang of the cart's frame reverberated through the tense air. "Still think this is a game," she said, her tone cold enough to chill bone. The third one, the smallest, hesitated for a split second before deciding to try his luck. He charged head down, but Maria stepped toward him, lowering her stance, and met his charge with a brutal shoulder check. The impact sent him stumbling backward into a stack of empty produce crates collapsing in a heap. Now, all three were down in one form or another. One gasping for air on the asphalt. One bent over the cart, rubbing his ribs, and one tangled in plastic crates, blinking in dazed confusion. The crowd erupted. Not in mockery this time, but in a roar of approval. Some clapped. Others whistled, and a few shouted, "That's what you get!" Maria stood in the center of it all, her breathing steady, her hands at her sides, still coiled with potential energy. She wasn't showboating, but there was no denying she had just dismantled them in front of everyone. "Get up," she ordered, her voice carrying over the din. "You're not going to crawl away. You're going to walk out of here with your heads down, and you're going to remember this moment the next time you think about putting your hands on someone who's just trying to make a living." They exchanged nervous glances, but did as they were told, moving slowly, each step heavy with humiliation. Maria's gaze didn't leave them until they'd cleared the edge of the market and melted into the crowd. The onlookers stayed silent for a long beat, as if letting the gravity of what they'd witnessed sink in. And then, just as suddenly, the market returned to life, vendors calling out deals, customers browsing again, but with sidelong looks of newfound respect aimed in Maria's direction. Her cart was a mess, fruit scattered, a crate cracked, but she didn't care. The balance had shifted. The lesson had begun. Maria knelt to gather the scattered fruit, her hands moving with calm precision, though her blood was still running hot. She could feel the market's eyes on her, not with pity this time, but with something closer to reverence. Vendors she'd known for years, who'd always kept to themselves, stepped forward to help. "You all right, Maria?" asked Jorge, the tamale seller, from 2 stalls down. His tone carried genuine concern, but also an undertone of pride. She gave a small nod. "I'm fine. Just a little overdue. As they picked up apples and pears, customers murmured their own thoughts. Some replayed the takedown in excited whispers. Others talked about how they'd seen those bullies harass vendors before, but had never stepped in. A few admitted they'd assumed Maria would just take it again, but not today. When the crowd's energy finally settled, Maria noticed a ripple at the far end of the street. The bullies had returned. Only this time, they weren't strutting. They walked slow shoulders, hunched eyes low. The ringleader approached her cart with cautious steps, his earlier arrogance completely stripped away. He stopped a few feet from her, the words catching in his throat before finally emerging. We were wrong. I was wrong. I shouldn't have touched you or your stuff. It won't happen again. The market quieted once more. Maria didn't speak right away. She simply stood, hands on the edge of her cart, looking at him as if weighing every syllable. Finally, she said, "You think saying sorry here fixes it? No. You earn it. You don't disrespect people just because you think you can walk away afterward." The second man, still rubbing his ribs, muttered, "We get it, all right." But Maria's sharp glance froze him mid-breath. "You don't get it," she said, her voice low but carrying. "You don't get to decide someone's worth. You don't get to take away their dignity. Not me. Not anyone here." She motioned to the other vendors. "These people work hard. They're not here for you to toy with when you're bored." Her words hung heavy in the air. The ringleader swallowed hard, gave a stiff nod, and turned away. This time, they didn't linger. They left without looking back, vanishing into the crowd for good. The market exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. Customers clapped quietly. Some even approached Maria to thank her. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly seen, not as just the woman behind the fruit cart, but as someone who could command respect. She returned to her work, stacking her apples into a fresh pyramid. Her hands were steady, her shoulders relaxed. She didn't smile, but there was a quiet satisfaction in the set of her jaw. The fight was over, but the lesson, the one she delivered with an iron grip and a fearless heart, would linger in this market for a long time. Respect is not given to those who shout the loudest or mock the hardest. It's earned through how you treat people when you think no one is watching. Maria's stand that day was more than a defense of herself. It was a stand for every vendor, worker, and passerby who's been made to feel small. She didn't need a weapon or an army, just the strength to refuse humiliation and the courage to act. In life, it's not always about fighting back with fists. Sometimes it's about holding your ground so firmly that no one dares cross it again. Bạn đã nói,